Chapter 8 of Abbotsford and Newstead Abbey by Washington Irving. This Librivox Recording is in the public domain. Recording by Greg Giordano. Newstead Abbey. Historical Notice. Being about to give a few sketches taken during a 3-week sojourn in the ancestral mansion of the late Lord Byron, I think it proper to premise some brief particulars concerning its history. Newstead Abbey is one of the finest specimens in existence of those quaint and romantic piles, half castle, half convent, which remain as monuments of the olden times of England. It stands, too, in the midst of a legendary neighborhood, being in the heart of Sherwood Forest, and surrounded by the haunts of Robin Hood and his band of outlaws, so famous in ancient ballad and nursery tale. It is true, the forest scarcely exists but in name, and the tract of country over which it once extended its broad solitudes and shades is now an open and smiling region, cultivated with parks and farms, and enlivened with villages. Newstead, which probably once exerted a monastic sway over this region, and controlled the consciences of the rude foresters, was originally a priory, founded in the latter part of the 12th century by Henry II., at the time when he sought, by building of shrines and convents, and by other acts of external piety, to expiate the murder of Thomas à Becket. The priory was dedicated to God and the Virgin, and was inhabited by a fraternity of canons regular of St. Augustine. This order was originally simple and abstemious in its mode of living, and exemplary in its conduct. But it would seem that it gradually lapsed into those abuses which disgraced too many of the wealthy monastic establishments, for there are documents among its archives which intimate the prevalence of gross misrule and dissolute sensuality among its members. At the time of the dissolution of the convents during the reign of Henry VIII., Newstead underwent a sudden reverse, being given, with the neighbouring manor and rectory of Papelwick, to Sir John Byron, Steward of Manchester and Rochdale, and Lieutenant of Sherwood Forest. This ancient family worthy figures in the traditions of the Abbey, and in the ghost stories with which it abounds, under the quaint and graphic appellation of Sir John Byron the Little with the Great Beard. He converted the saintly edifice into a castellated dwelling, making it his favourite residence and the seat of his forest jurisdiction. The Byron family being subsequently ennobled by a baronial title, and enriched by various possessions, maintained great style and retinue at Newstead. The proud edifice partook, however, of the vicissitudes of the times, and Lord Byron, in one of his poems, represents it as alternately the scene of lordly wassailing and of civil war. Hark, how the hall resounding to the strain shakes with the martial music's novel din! The heralds of a warrior's haughty reign, high-crested banners wave thy walls within. Of changing sentinels the distant hum, the mirth of feasts, the clang of burnished arms, the braying trumpet and the hoarser drum, unite in concert with increased alarms. About the middle of the last century, the Abbey came into the possession of another noted character, who makes no less figure in its shadowy traditions than Sir John the Little with the Great Beard. This was the grand-uncle of the poet, familiarly known among the gossiping chroniclers of the Abbey as the wicked Lord Byron. He is represented as a man of irritable passions and vindictive temper, in the indulgence of which an incident occurred which gave a turn to his whole character and life, and in some measure affected the fortunes of the Abbey. In his neighbourhood lived his kinsman and friend, Mr. Chaworth, proprietor of Ainsley Hall. Being together in London in 1765, in a chamber of the Star and Garter Tavern in Pall Mall, a quarrel rose between them. Byron insisted upon settling it upon the spot by single combat. They fought without seconds, by the dim light of a candle, and Mr. Chaworth, although the most expert swordsman, received the mortal wound. With his dying breath he related such particulars the contest as induced the coroner's jury to return a verdict of wilful murder. Lord Byron was sent to the Tower, and subsequently tried before the House of Peers, where an ultimate verdict was given of manslaughter. He retired after this to the Abbey, where he shut himself up to brood over his disgraces, grew gloomy, morose, and fantastical, and indulged in fits of passion and caprice that made him the theme of royal wonder and scandal. No tale was too wild or too monstrous for vulgar belief. Like his successor the poet, he was accused of all kinds of vagaries and wickedness. It was said that he always went armed, as if prepared to commit murder on the least provocation. At one time, when a gentleman of his neighbourhood was to dine tete-a-tete with him, it is said a brace of pistols were gravely laid with the knives and forks upon the table, as part of the regular table furniture, and implements that might be needed in the course of the repast. Another rumour states that being exasperated at his coachman for disobedience to orders, he shot him on the spot, threw his body into the coach where Lady Byron was seated, and, mounting the box, officiated in his stead. At another time, according to the same vulgar rumours, he threw her ladyship into the lake in front of the Abbey, where she would have been drowned, but for the timely aid of the gardener. These stories are doubtless exaggerations of trivial incidents, which may have occurred, but it is certain that the wayward passions of this unhappy man caused a separation from his wife, and finally spread a solitude around him. Being displeased at the marriage of his son and heir, he displayed an inveterate malignity toward him. Not being able to cut off his succession to the Abbey estate, which descended to him by entail, he endeavoured to injure it as much as possible, so that it might come a mere wreck into his hands. For this purpose he suffered the Abbey to fall out of repair, and everything to go waste about it, and cut down all the timber on the estate, laying low many a tract of old Sherwood forest, so that the Abbey lands lay stripped and bare of all their ancient honours. He was baffled in his unnatural revenge by the premature death of his son, and passed the remainder of his days in his deserted and dilapidated halls, a gloomy misanthrope, brooding amidst the scenes he had laid desolate. His wayward humours drove from him all neighbourly society, and for a part of the time he was almost without domestics. In his misanthropic mood, when at variance with all humankind, he took to feeding crickets, so that in process of time the Abbey was overrun with them, and its lonely halls made more lonely at night by their monotonous music. Tradition adds that, at his death, the crickets seemed aware that they had lost their patron and protector, for they one and all packed up bag and baggage, and left the Abbey, trooping across its courts and corridors in all directions. The death of the old lord, or the wicked Lord Byron, for he is known by both appellations, occurred in 1798, and the Abbey then passed into the possession of the poet. The latter was but 11 years of age, and living in humble style with his mother in Scotland. They came soon after to England to take possession. Moore gives a simple but striking anecdote of the first arrival of the poet at the domains of his ancestors. They had arrived at the Newstead toll bar, and saw the woods of the Abbey stretching out to receive them, when Mrs. Byron, affecting to be ignorant of the place, asked the woman of the toll house to whom that seat belonged. She was told that the owner of it, Lord Byron, had been some months dead. "And who is the next heir?" asked the proud and happy mother. "They say," answered the old woman, "it is a little boy who lives at Aberdeen." "And this is he, bless him!" exclaimed the nurse, no longer able to contain herself, and turning to kiss with delight the young lord who was seated on her lap. [Footnote: Moore's Life of Lord Byron.] During Lord Byron's minority, the Abbey was let to Lord Grey de Ruthyn, but the poet visited occasionally during the Harrow vacations, when he resided with his mother at lodgings in Nottingham. It was treated little better by its present tenant than by the old lord who preceded him, so that when, in the autumn of 1808, Lord Byron took up his abode there, it was in a ruinous condition. The following lines from his own pen may give some idea of its condition. Through thy battlements, Newstead, the hollow winds whistle. Thou, the hall of my fathers, art gone to decay. In thy once smiling garden, the hemlock and thistle have choked up the rose which once bloomed in the way of the mail-covered barons who proudly to battle led thy vassals from Europe to Palestine's plain. The escutcheon and shield, which with every wind rattle, are the only sad vestiges now that remain. Footnote: Lines on leaving Newstead Abbey. End of footnote. In another poem, he expresses the melancholy feeling with which he took possession of his ancestral mansion. Newstead, what saddening scene of change is thine? Thy yawning arch betokens sure decay. The last and youngest of a noble line now holds thy mouldering turrets in his sway. Deserted now, he scans thy grey-worn towers, thy vaults where dead of feudal ages sleep, thy cloisters pervious to the wintry showers. These he views, and views them but to weep. Yet he prefers thee to the gilded domes, or gewgaw grottoes of the vainly great, yet lingers mid thy damp and mossy tombs, nor breathes a murmur 'gainst the will of fate. Footnote: Elegy on Newstead Abbey. End of footnote. Lord Byron had not fortune sufficient to put the pile in extensive repair, nor to maintain anything like the state of his ancestors. He restored some of the apartments, so as to furnish his mother with a comfortable habitation, and fitted up a quaint study for himself, in which, among books and busts, and other library furniture, were 2 skulls of the ancient friars, grinning on each side of an antique cross. One of his gay companions gives a picture of Newstead when thus repaired, and the picture is sufficiently desolate. There are 2 tiers of cloisters, with a variety of cells and rooms about them, which, though not inhabited, nor in an uninhabitable state, might easily be made so, and many of the original rooms, among which is a fine stone hall, are still in use. Of the Abbey church, one end only remains, and the old kitchen, with a long range of apartments, is reduced to a heap of rubbish. Leading from the Abbey to the modern part of the habitation is a noble room, 70 feet in length and 23 in breadth, but every part of the house displays neglect and decay, save those which the present lord has lately fitted up. Footnote: Letter of the late Charles Skinner Matthews, Esquire. End of footnote. Even the repairs thus made were but of transient benefit, for the roof being left in its dilapidated state, the rain soon penetrated into the apartments which Lord Byron had restored and decorated, and in a few years rendered them almost as desolate as the rest of the Abbey. Still he felt a pride in the ruinous old edifice. Its very dreary and dismantled state addressed itself to his poetical imagination, and to that love of the melancholy and the grand which is evinced in all his writings. "Come what may," said he in one of his letters, "Newstead and I stand or fall together. I have now lived on the spot. I have fixed my heart upon it, and no pressure, present or future, shall induce me to barter the last vestige of our inheritance. I have that pride within me which will enable me to support difficulties. Could I obtain in exchange for Newstead Abbey the first fortune in the country, I would reject the proposition." His residence at the Abbey, however, was fitful and uncertain. He passed occasional portions of time there, sometimes studiously and alone, oftener idly and recklessly, and occasionally with young and gay companions, in riot and revelry, and the indulgence of all kinds of mad caprice. The Abbey was by no means benefited by these roystering inmates, who sometimes played off monkish mummeries about the cloisters, at other times turned the state chambers into schools for boxing and single-stick, and shot pistols in the great hall. The country people of the neighbourhood were as much puzzled by these madcap vagaries of the new incumbent as by the gloomier habits of the old lord, and began to think that madness was inherent in the Byron race, or that some wayward star ruled over the Abbey. It is needless to enter into a detail of the circumstances which led his lordship to sell his ancestral estate, notwithstanding the partial predilections and hereditary feeling which he had so eloquently expressed. Fortunately, it fell into the hands of a man who possessed something of a poetical temperament, and who cherished an enthusiastic admiration for Lord Byron. Colonel, at that time Major, Wildman had been a schoolmate of the poet, and sat with him on the same form at Harrow. He had subsequently distinguished himself in the War of the Peninsula, and at the Battle of Waterloo, and it was a great consolation to Lord Byron, in parting with his family estate, to know that it would be held by one capable of restoring its faded glories, and who would respect and preserve all the monuments and memorials of his line. [Footnote: The following letter, written in the course of the transfer of the estate, has never been published. Venice, November 18, 1818. My dear Wildman, Mr. Hanson is on the eve of his return, so that I have only time to return a few inadequate thanks for your very kind letter. I should regret to trouble you with any requests of mine, in regard to the preservation of any signs of my family which may still exist at Newstead, and leave everything of that kind to your own feelings, present or future, upon the subject. The portrait which you flatter me by desiring would not be worth to you your trouble and expense of such an expedition, but you may rely upon having the very first that may be painted, and which may seem worth your acceptance. I trust that Newstead will, being yours, remain so, and that it may see you as happy as I am very sure that you will make your dependence. With regard to myself, you may be sure that whether in the 4th, or 5th, or 6th form at Harrow, or in the fluctuations of after life, I shall always remember with regard my old schoolfellow, fellow monitor and friend, and recognize with respect the gallant soldier, who, with all the advantages of fortune and allurements of youth to a life of pleasure, devoted himself to duties of a nobler order, and will receive his reward in the esteem and admiration of his country. Ever yours most truly and affectionately, Byron. The confidence of Lord Byron in the good feeling and good taste of Colonel Wildman has been justified by the event. Under his judicious eye and munificent hand, the venerable and romantic pile has risen from its ruins in all its old monastic and baronial splendour, and additions have been made to it in perfect conformity of style. The groves and forests have been replanted, the lakes and fish ponds cleaned out, and the gardens rescued from the hemlock and thistle, and restored to their pristine and dignified formality. The farms on the estate have been put in complete order, new farmhouses built of stone, in the picturesque and comfortable style of the old English granges, the hereditary tenants secured in their paternal homes, and treated with the most considerate indulgence. Everything, in a word, gives happy indications of a liberal and beneficent landlord. What most, however, will interest the visitors to the Abbey in favour of its present occupant is the reverential care with which he has preserved and renovated every monument and relic of the Byron family, and every object in any wise connected with the memory of the poet. £80,000 have already been expended upon the venerable pile, yet the work is still going on, and Newstead promises to realize the hope faintly breathed by the poet when bidding it a melancholy farewell. Haply thy sun emerging yet may shine, thee to irradiate with meridian ray. Hours splendid as the past may still be thine, and bless thy future as thy formal day. End of chapter 8. Recording by Greg Giordano. Newport Richey, Florida.